Howdy my totallys, always Tubular Gamers, we're back with another video. I got another ranking video for you all. Today, we're going to be talking about Splinter Cell. Yes, it's finally time to talk some Tom Clancy. We're going to be ranking the Splinter Cell games. So for the unfamiliar, Splinter Cell is a series of stealth games in the Tom Clancy franchise that is pretty rooted in reality. The series follows Sam Fisher, this highly trained agent who does plenty of Black Ops off-the-grid operations for the NSA. This series started back in 2002 and was an immediate huge success. While it was inspired and might share some similarities with Metal Gear Solid, there had really never been a stealth game like this before. It was about you hiding in the dark, in the shadows, staying hidden, trying to be as quiet as possible, and of course, taking out some pretty nasty people. The game would go on to be a huge success for Ubisoft, and they would greenlit many more sequels, and some of these games really are some of the most beloved games of not only the 2000s, but the entire Tom Clancy franchise, with one of them in particular being considered maybe the greatest stealth video game of all time. We would get more Splinter Cell games until 2013 with Splinter Cell Blacklist, and as it currently stands, this is the latest game in the Splinter Cell series. We've been waiting over 10 years for the next game, and while Ubisoft has confirmed that there is a remake coming of the original at some point, it has been quite a while since Sam Fisher donned the iconic goggles that we all know and love. People love this series for a variety of reasons. They love just how stealthy you actually get to be. Infiltrating a place at night, shooting out all of the light bulbs, staying completely hidden, throwing those goggles on, taking fools out left and right. In complete darkness, the games do a great job at making you feel just straight up invisible. Top this off with some fantastic missions and level design, and it's no wonder that this series is as beloved as it is. And so with that, we're going to be ranking the entire Splinter Cell series from worst to best. I'm going to be stacking these games up against each other, comparing, contrasting, seeing which ones are worth playing, sharing my thoughts, feelings, memories, etc., giving each of these games a little review since I actually do have quite a bit to say about all of them, and generally just seeing which games are even worth your time to begin with. I've been a fan of the Splinter Cell series for a while, but I didn't play a lot of the games actually until this year, 2024. So it'll be interesting to look at these games with a more modern lens. I also won't be looking at the handheld versions of these games, so I won't be looking at like the Game Boy Advance version of the original game or Splinter Cell 3D, but I will be covering the PSP title Essentials. And of course, all of this is just my opinion. You can agree, disagree, let me know down below what your favorite Splinter Cell game is, if you like my ranking or assessments, or if you really hate it and completely disagree with me. I'm always lurking down there. As always, please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly, and I mean truly, greatly appreciated. Like, seriously, y'all. Thank you so very much. The reason I'm even looking at this series is because a patron asked me to, and you know, I like to give some love to my patrons. Thank you all very much. Let's get into the games. And here we have Splinter Cell Essentials releasing exclusively for the PSP in 2006. It probably doesn't come as much of a surprise that I think this is the weakest game in the entire Splinter Cell series, but despite that, I wouldn't say that this is a broken, unplayable mess. It's just not a very good game. So when it comes to this game's story, it's a bit complicated. The game takes place after Double Agent, where in order to keep his identity a secret, he had to kill someone from the NSA, and naturally the NSA didn't exactly like this, so Sam Fisher's actually a fugitive and is now on the run. However, he gets captured and taken into custody to the NSA headquarters, where he gets interrogated about what he's been doing and what exactly has been happening and how we really got to this situation to begin with, so you get to recall past events and play through those previous events. This game's story feels entirely like filler. It doesn't really do anything, it doesn't go in any interesting directions, it doesn't add anything to the overall narrative of the Splinter Cell series, and the story is just more of a footnote. The story really is just kind of whatever in this game. The game ends basically the exact same way it begins, and if you never played this game and went from Double Agent to Conviction, yeah, you're not missing anything. Alright, so the story is just kind of whatever, but how does it play? Well, it tries to play like the older Splinter Cell games. You gotta remember this was a PSP game in 2006, so obviously it was quite compromised in a few different key areas. But it generally tries to replicate the gameplay of the older Splinter Cell titles. Quite literally, actually, a number of these missions are just repeats from the main games. The original game, Chaos Theory, Pandora Tomorrow, and there's even a level in here that's Double Agent. Of course though, these are incredibly compromised, level design is different, objectives are different, and at times, yeah, these don't even feel like the original levels, but I also get it might be really hard to convert Xbox or PS2 game levels to a PSP, but man, do these levels feel so watered down. The game does have some original content to it, but this isn't really anything all that special. It's very linear, forgettable, and just kind of generic. I'd actually rather just play the watered down levels from the prior games instead of these new levels, which isn't a good sign. But the core moment-to-moment gameplay tries to recreate the success of the older games, where you're in third person, you're sneaking around, hiding in the shadows, taking people out and doing some objectives. But unfortunately, the controls and feel of this game really get in the way from making the game all that enjoyable. If the controls are fine, this would be like a mediocre, middling stealth experience, but the controls really just kind of drag it down. Since the PSP only had one stick, the controls become awkward, clumsy, unintuitive, and they just feel incredibly unnatural. For instance, you can't really move Sam and the camera at the same time. You can only move one at a time, and it's as bad as it sounds. You also can't really control your movement speed all that well. And the controls in general just don't flow well. Like, I'm sure you could get used to it and it's not the worst controls I've ever seen on the PSP, but man, this just does not feel good. And then switching between tools or items or interacting with the environment, it all feels just incredibly unintuitive. If you're playing on an emulator, you can rebind all of the controls and make it feel a little more natural like another Splinter Cell game, but you really shouldn't have to do that. The controls, sloppy movement, and just awkward feel really are my biggest issues with this game. It just makes the entire game feel like a chore. It just wrecks the pacing, and it makes the game rather unenjoyable. If you can look past the controls, you still don't really have a great game here. You have some whatever forgettable new levels, rehashes of old levels that are done worse, and at times it doesn't feel like this game has an original bone in its body, just reusing assets, music, animations, level themes, etc. It's also not a very good looking game on the PSP. Like, some areas just look terrible, the character models look awful, and the frame rate is a bit suspicious. Despite being called Splinter Cell Essentials, this game is anything but essential. It's a total miss. There is no reason to play this game. It doesn't move the story forward. Most of the missions are worse rehashes of prior missions, and any original content that shows up here is just completely forgettable. I can't even recommend this game to the most die-hard of Splinter Cell fans. Just go replay one of the other games. It's way better than this. So here we have Splinter Cell Double Agent, which initially released in 2006. I will immediately say that there are two very different home console versions of this game, but for simplicity's sake, I just have both of them right here. To be totally honest with you, initially I did have them split up, but every single time I made this ranking, these two games were just back to back, so might as well just put them together. So anyway, Double Agent was a pretty big step for the Splinter Cell series. They abandoned a lot of things that the series was known for and tried to do something different. When it comes to the general premise, both versions are pretty similar, where it sees Sam just doing another mission, taking out some terrorists, saving the world, you know, his usual 9 to 5, but then he's actually informed by Lambert that his only child, Sarah, actually has been killed. She was hit by a drunk driver and didn't survive the incident. Sam becomes very overcome with grief, as you would expect, and he really just hasn't been himself, so instead of getting him, you know, therapy or counseling or some kind of real psychological help, Lambert instead gives Sam like the most dangerous job he's ever given him, where he basically becomes a non-official cover operative, and he has to infiltrate this domestic terrorist organization known as the JBA to figure out what they're planning, who they're working with, and how to stop them. In layman's terms, Sam's a secret agent working for this terrorist organization and the CIA, trying not to piss either of them off and figuring out how he can save as many people as possible. The general premise might be pretty similar for both versions, but the way the plot unfolds is actually different for each version. The canon true storyline is the HD version, but the non-HD version also has a pretty wild story that has some really crazy moments, and the ending can actually be like drastically different depending on what you did in the game. But I will say, regardless of the version you're playing, I think the story is actually pretty good in Double Agent. It's one of the best aspects to the game. I actually really like the storyline, I like Sam's little bit of character development, and the last hour or so for either version can get pretty crazy. Now when it comes to the gameplay, again, it does depend on which version you are playing. I will start with the HD version. It is a bit different from the other SC games. The HUD has been minimalized in the HD version. Instead of all these indicators on screen if you were in the dark or if you were being quiet, it's all been reduced to really just a light on Sam's back. In an effort to better immerse you into the game, they got rid of all the necessary information on screen and we really just have this light to go off of. I will just say immediately, I don't really care for this. It's not super reliable and it's just not always crazy obvious how hidden or quiet you're being. And I do prefer how the prior games did it, immersion be damned. When it comes to the core moment-to-moment gameplay, basically what it is you'll be dropped into these environments and you'll be given a series of missions. Since you are a double agent, you'll be getting missions from the terrorist organization JBA and also from the NSA. And doing missions for either will make them favor you, and there actually is an indicator how much they approve of you. There's a whole little bar down there and everything, and sometimes you'll do an objective for, say, the terrorists, and the CIA is not going to like that, and vice versa, and it'll make the bar go down. And the game actually does put you in several scenarios where you will have to choose one over the other, and there's also plenty of other actions that can affect this bar as well, like if you're caught sneaking around the base, that'll make the terrorists trust you less. Now don't get it twisted, I actually do think this is a really cool idea. I can't think of really any other game that's ever tried something like this, but unfortunately it just feels really half-baked. It's clear they really wanted you to make these like difficult split-second decisions where you gotta weigh both of your options, but it's just way too easy to get your trust back in this game. Like, it is really easy to get them to trust you again, and so your decisions feel rather meaningless. It feels like the only way you can get a side to actually be mad at you is if you go and directly piss them off. Anybody that's even remotely trying to not piss both of them off will do just fine in this game. But nonetheless, I still think it is a cool mechanic and they did try to do something different. But when it comes to the actual missions in this game, how are they? I think they're good for the most part. There are actually some really cool ones here with some nice set pieces and good environments. Like, I actually really enjoyed the mission where you're on the ship in the snow. I thought that was a pretty cool set piece, but I will be blunt. There are a few missions in this game that just kind of suck. This game introduces daytime missions, which in my opinion is like the antithesis of what the older Splinter Cell games were. Those games had like exclusively night missions. That's what Splinter Cell is. This game, oh yeah, you do plenty of missions during the day, and these, yeah, they're not so great. It's really hard to be sneaking around in the shadows in the dark when, you know, there's just light outside and it's really bright literally everywhere. And then I already mentioned how I don't really care all that much for how stealth is handled in this game since it's just a fucking light. Like, yeah, I'm immersed, but I also don't have anywhere near as much information. It feels just kind of sloppy. And it's kind of funny, there are some night missions here and it doesn't really feel all that different from the older Splinter Cell games. These are actually pretty good. And then there's some daytime missions where I'm just like, what even is this? There's a mission where you go to like an active war zone and this feels just completely out of place for Splinter Cell. Like, what is this doing here? I don't know if it's a hot take, but this was like my least favorite mission in the entire game. You also spend a bunch of missions in the actual base where you're usually timed and you have to do a few objectives, and this, I actually like this. There was a bit of pressure since there was a time limit. There is a lot of minigames that also show up in this game. Hacking minigames, lockpicking minigames, the stupid fucking cube puzzle. These minigames were really starting to get on my nerves. Like, that cube puzzle can just fuck right off. This game isn't all bad though. There were moments where you still feel incredibly stealthy and you actually feel, you know, like a silent badass. There were parts where I was moving through the shadows like the old games where I was like, yes, this is Splinter Cell. But for every, you know, pretty good mission, you get one that's mid at best or not very good at worst. And again, that level in the war zone was just not it. At the very least for the time, I think the game actually looked pretty good. There's some solid environments and good character models here. The music wasn't half bad either. I will say though, if you're going to play this game in current year, do not play the PC version. One of the worst PC ports top to bottom. I played this game with tons and tons of fixes, some from Ubisoft, some fan ones, and I still had a ridiculous amount of issues. I spent way too much time troubleshooting. I should have just played the 360 version. But all in all, I think the HD version of Double Agent is just okay. It could have been a lot better, but you know, it certainly could have been a lot worse. Then we have the non-HD version that was released for, you know, like the GameCube, the PS2, the original Xbox, and even the Wii. While this version does have a lot of similarities to the HD version, you know, with the whole double agent mechanic, it does do a few things differently. The first thing to probably note is that I am calling it the non-HD version, which means the graphics, aren't as good as the HD version, but I still think this game looks alright. The next thing I will bring up is that stealth is actually different in this game. They've got the HUD. Yeah, it's not exactly the same as the prior games, but it still gives you all the necessary information, and I'm glad that it's here. I think the stealth is genuinely better in this version. I also think that the missions for the most part are better. It's not exactly the same as the HD version. A majority of the game actually takes place at night, and you do feel like a badass moving through the shadows. You know, kind of what Splinter Cell is known for.
Give them what they came here for!
Now I will say though, not everything is done better in the non-HD version. The way that they handle the double agent aspect of the game, I think is actually done better in the HD version. Here, it just feels even more artificial and just half-baked than even the HD version. Instead of there being 2 bars, one for each side, it's just 1 bar now, and helping either side will move the bar in a certain direction. I don't really love this because now actions or objectives that have literally nothing to do with the other side will affect the other side. They won't trust you as much, and you might go, oh, well, this is better. You actually have to pick and choose, but the game still makes you do plenty of objectives for both sides, and you really just want to keep it in the middle. But if you actually get it skewed too far on one side, you do get a bonus mission to try to win back some of that trust. I just prefer how the HD version did it, but I know there are plenty of people that feel the opposite of the way I did. Either way, I prefer the non-HD version of Double Agent. I don't think it's like significantly better than the HD version, I just think it's slightly better. It certainly is more of what I expected from a Splinter Cell game. If I'm going to recommend this game at all in current year, I'm going to recommend the non-HD version. I'd say go check out that original Xbox game instead of the 360 one. Regardless of which version you're playing, I think this game is just alright. And so here we have Splinter Cell Conviction, which initially released in 2010. Conviction is rather different from basically every other Splinter Cell game, where it seemingly distances itself even further from what made this series so beloved in the first place. It takes place after Double Agent and Essentials, like that means anything, and it sees Sam Fisher investigating his daughter's mysterious death. There might have been more to it than just a hit and run, and there's actually quite a bit more to this story as well, as Sam's old colleague Grim hits him up and things really get going. When it comes to this game's story, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really care much for it. It's rather different from the other Splinter Cell stories, and I found it to just be incredibly predictable from start to finish. Like, I try my best to not make predictions or guess what is going to happen next when I'm playing a game, but it felt like it was really hard with this game, and I just had a hard time feeling all that connected with Sam or what was going on in this game. And by the end of it, I just kind of felt indifferent, and I was like, well, it's over now. The co-op mode has its own story that takes place before the main game, but I don't feel like this added all that much either. It just kind of added some flavor text and additional context. When all was said and done, I just didn't really care much for the story. When it comes to the gameplay, yeah, it's pretty different from the Splinter Cell that you might have played in the 2000s. This was a new era for Splinter Cell, the 2010s, and yeah, it's much more of an action stealth game rather than a more traditional stealth game. Moving around in darkness, slowly taking out your enemies one at a time, oh yeah, that's all gone. Bring in the mark and execute. That's exactly what this game centers its stealth gameplay, really almost all of its gameplay around. Sam himself can move like a badass. Despite getting older and older, he's out here moving like he's in his 20s. You can climb pretty much everything. He actually moves very fast, and it's nothing short of impressive for someone his age. It makes the movement actually feel pretty good in this game, even if it doesn't make all that much sense in the story. So at least the controls and general movement have been nailed down, but when it comes to that core moment-to-moment gameplay, it really is all about the mark and execute, where you're able to mark certain targets, and once they're marked and you're in a certain distance, you just press the trigger and yeah, you execute them. And we're not just talking about one target at a time here. You can actually have several all at once and take them all out at the same time. And yeah, it does feel pretty cool, especially when you basically get everyone in a room all together and then you just wipe them all out at once. It does actually feel nice. It doesn't feel anywhere near as rewarding or satisfying as clearing out a room in the older games, but I won't lie to you, it does actually feel kinda nice. There is quite a bit of shooting in this game. It feels much more like a traditional third-person shooter. You even get to take cover, and it feels fine. The shooting feels significantly better than, say, the older Splinter Cell games, but those games didn't expect you to get into firefights like Conviction does. You can totally try to be stealthy like the older games. It's encouraged if you're on the harder difficulties, but man, this game really emphasizes mark and execute. They also have another new mechanic known as last known position, which is, as it implies, the last known position Sam was at, and it creates like a silhouette. so you can visually see it and the enemies will go to that area, and I actually think this is pretty well done also. This game's also got plenty of set pieces where stuff's blowing up, you're running through an area as fast as you can, chasing after somebody, and it is a rather exciting campaign for the most part. There are actually some pretty good levels here. A few of them are a little forgettable and don't really do all that much, but a majority of them were actually pretty good. The biggest problem with the campaign is easily the length. You can finish this game in under 4 hours on your first playthrough. Like, that's really short. That's not even half the time it took me to finish like Chaos Theory or the original game. And I really just wanted more from this game. More missions, more gameplay, more variety, more. At least what we have here is actually pretty good. Despite feeling rather different from really any of the other games, this was still enjoyable. And it's totally okay for a series to try a new gameplay style or try some new ideas as long as it's good. And this game is. It's just, I wanted more, damn it. And this game, it did have more. Emphasis on did. It did have a multiplayer mode that was not spies versus mercs, and then it also had a co-op campaign, but unfortunately at this time both of them have been shut down. So there's no way to play online in an official capacity. At the very least, you can still play the co-op campaign because it supports split screen. They can't take that from us. I actually played through the co-op campaign many years ago and found it rather enjoyable. The gameplay is very similar to the core game, except now there's two people, neither of which are Sam Fisher. It focuses a lot more on the mark and execute than even the main game does, and you can do some pretty cool shit in this game. Like the main campaign though, it is rather short. And I don't think these levels are as good or memorable as the main games. I'm just glad the game had more. At least from a presentation standpoint, the game absolutely holds up. It still looks pretty good. The environments are nice. There's good character models and the frame rate was pretty solid. I will say though, if you are going to play Splinter Cell Conviction in the modern day, absolutely do not play the PC version of this game. It is completely borked and is basically unplayable. I tried for over an hour to get this stupid version to work and I just could not get it running past like 10 FPS. I can't play the game like this. Play the console versions and hopefully in the future this game gets re-released in some capacity because that PC version, it is atrocious. All in all, Splinter Cell Conviction is a good game. I don't think it's a great game, and I don't love that at times it kind of feels like they abandoned Splinter Cell's identity, but this is still a pretty decent stealth game that actually is fun to play and it may be worth your time. It's also rather short, so that certainly makes it easier to recommend, but the mark and execute, man, this is actually pretty fun. It's not the stealth gameplay I'm really looking for from Splinter Cell, but it was still rather enjoyable. And I think most people that like stealth games are going to like Conviction if they already haven't made their mind up about it. So here we have Splinter Cell Blacklist, which released in 2013. As I'm recording this video, this is the latest Splinter Cell game, which hurts my heart. I actually can recall back when this game came out, there was a good amount of hype behind it, and I remember getting it back when it came out and playing like halfway through it and then just stopping for some reason. I guess I just wanted to play other things. It wasn't until very recently that I finally played all the way through the game. And I gotta say, all these years later, I think the game actually is pretty good, and it totally is a step in the right direction from what Double Agent and Conviction were doing. Now when it comes to this game's story, it is a bit more complicated than the older games thanks to all the crazy shit that happened in Double Agent and Conviction, but essentially it sees Sam starting up his own group of highly trained operatives known as Fourth Echelon, and they work directly for the president. And their mission, it's pretty simple. It's to stop this mysterious group of terrorists known as the Engineers, and that's all I'm going to say about the story. I think the story is pretty decent in this game. The Engineers are pretty decent antagonists, and there are some cool things that actually happen in this story. There is one thing though that I really don't care for, not only with this game's story, but the game in general, and that's Sam himself. If you don't know, Michael Ironside does not voice Sam, and he has a different voice actor. This isn't the end of the world, like I never got used to it, but I'm not going to act like his performance was terrible or something like that. I think he did a decent job, it's just not Michael Ironside. No, what bothered me more was how Sam acts in this game. He just seems like a completely different person. Maybe it's thanks to how crazy Double Agent and Conviction got, but he really does not act at all like how he does in the prior games. He's angry. There are several instances where he just straight up berates his teammates, and again, he just didn't feel anything like Sam Fisher. He's also gotten pretty up there in age, but he's still moving around like a crazy man out here. The older he gets, the more agile apparently he gets. But hey, you're probably not coming to Blacklist for this deep, engrossing narrative. You came because you want to be stealthy man in shadow. And when it comes to how this game plays, I think they actually did a pretty awesome job. I really like the approach this game takes to stealth in general. They let you have the best of both worlds. If you want to play this game like the older Splinter Cell games where you're hiding in the dark, being completely undetected, not taking a single soul out, they'll let you play through the whole game like that. You can also be a bit more lethal in your approach, but what I really like is that they didn't ditch all the shit from Conviction either. Mark and Execute is still here. If you want to just run around killing everybody like you did in Conviction, you can play through this entire game like that. And regardless of your approach, the game is going to reward you. I actually think this system is very well implemented. Every single level can be completed in any of the 3 ways, and you can totally replay missions and try a completely different approach. Maybe one time you just run in and kill everybody. You go guns blazing, mark and execute everybody. The second time you sneak through there, not a single person saw you. And I think most of these levels are set up very well for all these different approaches. Now I will say, mark and execute, it is just as good as it was in Conviction. It's satisfying, it's fun, and it can get pretty chaotic. But when it comes to the stealth, this game is no slouch either. It does take the double agent approach to stealth with the stupid little light, but it is better implemented than double agent. It's a lot more obvious and clear when you're actually undetectable or hidden, or when an enemy might be able to spot you. At the very least, it's a step in the right direction. I think the stealth though is actually pretty good in this game. Sam himself is also incredibly agile. Like I mentioned, you can just jump all over the place, you can hang on to shit, and every area just feels incredibly interactive. When it comes to the missions in this game, I think it actually is pretty good. I think a majority of the missions are actually well designed. You can run in there and be super secret stealth man, or you can run in there and just annihilate everybody, and yeah, there's a lot of good parts to these missions. There's memorable areas, set pieces, they don't feel like straight lines, and all of the missions genuinely, for the most part, feel relatively different from each other. There are some daytime missions which do make me groan, but a majority of the missions do take place at night, and there are some really cool moments in a few of these levels. There's one level where you actually sneak into the Guantanamo Bay torture camps, and that's a pretty good level. Something different that this game has from other Splinter Cells is there's actually side missions to do. Yeah, you can do these optional missions to try to get better gear. And while most of these are forgettable and feel just kind of thrown in there, it's still cool that they're here. And speaking of gear, that is something this game has that I actually don't like. It does have a gear system where you can kind of customize Sam. It has this gear upgrade system where Sam can upgrade all of his gear so that he moves more quietly or he's harder to detect in the dark, etc, etc. And if you want to upgrade Sam, you're going to have to get money, which you get from completing missions, and then to even unlock some of this gear, you have to do the side missions, and I just don't really like this. In the older games, they would just give you the best shit. You didn't need to upgrade Sam. Why wouldn't I have the best stuff? Not only does it not really make any sense from a narrative perspective, but I really just don't like how you have to upgrade Sam to make him as good as he was in the old games. For instance, if you are moving at anything but an absolute snail's pace, the enemies are going to be able to hear you unless you have like the best shit equipped. And it's like, no, you shouldn't need the best stuff equipped. Come on now. I just don't think this is necessary for a series like Splinter Cell, but I'd rather have this than any more fucking Ubisoft skill points. So there's that at least, but I'm not going to act like this is an absolute deal breaker. It's more of just a minor nuisance. All in all, I think Blacklist is actually a pretty good game. While it doesn't reach the highs of the earlier games, it doesn't fall to the depths of the later games, and I think that anybody who enjoys Splinter Cell or stealth games in general is going to be able to like this game. It might take a minute to get used to the controls, the presentation might have some 2010s filters on it, but I still think this is a pretty enjoyable experience all around. Oh yeah, and the multiplayer was actually pretty good. I think there might actually still be people even playing it nowadays. So here we have Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow, which initially released in 2004. This was the follow-up to the original Splinter Cell. But funny enough, it wasn't made by the team that made the original game. They were working on the sequel, Chaos Theory. When it comes to this game's story and setup, it's pretty Splinter Cell out here, where you play as Sam Fisher trying to take out some international terrorists and, of course, save the world. The game actually has you go to some pretty unique locations, at least when it comes to video games, but a majority of the game takes place in Indonesia, of all places. And I think it's actually pretty cool how many different unique settings you go to in this game, places that aren't really all that explored in video games. The story really isn't anything all that interesting. If you've played any Tom Clancy game, you'll immediately know the deal here. It's pretty rooted in realism, and the terrorists aren't these mustache-twirling evil human beings for the sake of being evil. There's a little bit more going on here, and Sam, he's as great as always. The story, it's fine for what it is, it gets the job done, and puts you in some pretty cool environments. When it comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay, it is very similar to the original game, like really similar to the original game. This feels much less like a sequel and more like a 1.5 to the original Splinter Cell. It controls and handles really exactly the same as the original game, meaning it's going to take you a minute to get used to it. It might feel a little clunky at first, it might even feel archaic, but you can absolutely get very accustomed to it, to the point that it does feel very natural. The control and feel of this game is not something I really have any issues with. If you could get used to it in the original or Chaos Theory, you can get used to it here. When it comes to Sam himself, he's pretty much unchanged from the prior game. Everything he could do in the original, he can do here. One new thing is that Sam can actually whistle to lure enemies to you, into the dark, so you can take them out. Yeah, it's a good addition. There's a few other things here and there, like health kits no longer being an inventory item, but for the most part, the gameplay is pretty much identical to the original. And for the most part, I think the stealth is actually pretty well done. You have some very clear indicators whether or not the enemies can see or hear you, and there are plenty of moments where you feel like Stealth Man's solid. Nobody can see you and you're just taking dudes out one at a time, and you just feel like the coolest dude. Seriously though, you actually do feel pretty cool in this game. Something unchanged from the original that I didn't like in the original, and I certainly don't like here, is the way that alarms work and the fact that the game does checks. If 3 alarms go off, meaning either you were spotted or a body was found, then it's game over. And you better make sure whenever you take anybody out, on a date that is, you gotta be nice, you gotta be courteous, remember your manners. Okay. Whenever you take an enemy out, you better make sure that their ass is hidden, because the game regularly will do checks and it will make an alarm go off if you didn't do a good job hiding that body. And this can happen like way later in the level, and so you can become just totally screwed if you don't do a good job hiding these bodies. But it's not anything totally unmanageable. Just make sure you don't get spotted, you hide the bodies, solve world hunger, and cure cancer. Really easy stuff here. Something though that's not that easy for Sam Fisher is shooting. The shooting in this game, it just isn't great. It's pretty much the same as the original, where you have to wait seemingly an eternity if you want a really accurate, precise shot. This game does have a laser sight, but it just shows how inaccurate Sam is unless you are sitting just completely still. Getting into a firefight is not something you want to do in this game. But I also understand, it wasn't designed as a third-person shooter. The game doesn't expect you to be out here running and gunning. It's just, the shooting, it doesn't feel great, and you really do have to take your time. But the only thing you should be using your guns for is taking out the lights. And when you're taking out the lights, moving around in darkness, silently taking out your foes, this game is at its absolute best. When it comes to the missions in this game, for the most part, I think they are pretty good. There's some really cool ones in here, with plenty of memorable moments, like when you're on this train. The main gimmick for the game is the jungle. A majority of the levels are in the jungles, and I'm not head over heels for this, but I still enjoy it. I think a lot of these levels are a bit too linear for my liking. Despite that though, I wouldn't say that this game really has any bad levels. Some are clearly better than others, but for the most part, they're all pretty good. I will say though, by the end of the game, I was getting a bit tired of the game's stealth being a little finicky at times. Like, this game can have a good amount of trial and error, but that's more so on the game's age than anything else. When it comes to the actual missions, I think they're good for the most part. And then to finish things off, we have the game's presentation. It looks a little better than the original game, but the original game looked really good for the time, so I think it's still a good looking game. The lighting, it is actually pretty great in this game. So overall, if you like the other Splinter Cell games or you're looking for a classic stealth game, I think Pandora Tomorrow is a good game. While it didn't rock my cock off or blow me away or innovate like crazy on the original game, I still think it was an enjoyable experience. And so here we have the original Splinter Cell, the one that started it all, initially releasing for the Xbox in 2002. Now, despite being inspired by the Metal Gear series, there had never really been a game like Splinter Cell before. And it really was the start to one of the most beloved stealth game series of all time. So the game sees you playing as this NSA Black Ops agent known as Sam Fisher as he tries to take out some terrorists and keep the world at peace. The narrative is really in line with Tom Clancy, like as a brand it is rather rooted in realism, and tries its best to make scenarios, situations, events seem actually rather plausible, like it could happen in real life. When it comes to the actual story, I think it's fine, it gets the job done. At times it does feel a little generic, but Sam himself, even in this original game, His personality shines through. He cracks jokes, he says a few memorable things, and he just seems like an all-around likable guy. He really makes the story any good to begin with. But you're probably not playing Splinter Cell for the story, you're playing it because you want to be hidden in the shadows, and that's exactly what the original game strive for. The original game's focus and hallmark really was about being stealthy. It was about putting you in some dark-ass places, silently taking out enemies one at a time. And really everything is centered around that. The game gives you plenty of information to know how quiet you are when you're walking around or how visible you are with the light. You'll always have a very good understanding as to how hidden Sam Fisher is, and you'll want to stay hidden for the most part because Sam, despite being a trained operative, he isn't that great on the fly. You can't just pull out an assault rifle and start killing dudes left and right. His accuracy will go to shit. It's all about moving slowly, taking your time, and staying relatively hidden. And when it comes to the stealth gameplay, it's really great. Sneaking up on fools in total darkness and knocking their ass out, it feels really good, especially when you follow someone for a long time and then you finally take them out. To see in the dark, you got your badass goggles with a few different vision types, and it just feels like the game is giving you all the tools you need for success here. Like, they give you all of the tools to be the quietest man alive, the stealthiest person to ever walk this earth, and then it's up to you to figure out how exactly to be as stealthy as can be. Sam himself is pretty agile, and so you can get around these environments in a variety of different ways, and I really like how non-linear this game feels at times, where it feels like there's actually different approaches to your objective. And I don't mean how you complete the objective necessarily, I mean just getting to the objective. I think the stealth gameplay, all these years later, it still is really great. Like, it might take you a minute to get used to it. The controls and the feel can feel a little archaic. It might not feel the most modern, but once you get into the swing of things, it feels really great. Like, it's impressive how good the controls and feel of this game still is. All these years later, it still is a master class. Well, maybe outside of the 3 alarms and body checking nonsense, where if 3 alarms go off, it is game over for you, and you want to make sure you hide those bodies because the game will do checks to make sure they're hidden. But I think as long as you're patient and you take your time, you're going to be just fine. Now, when it comes to the missions of the original Splinter Cell, they're all pretty great. Some of the very best missions this series has ever had were right here in this original game, filled with memorable moments and set pieces. You go to some really awesome areas, and I think the level design is just very well done. Again, it is actually kind of non-linear and a little more open, and yeah, I just really enjoyed the levels here. It's really the main reason why I prefer the original Splinter Cell to Pandora Tomorrow. Like, yeah, Pandora Tomorrow has the whistling and some cool stuff, but I think the missions in the original game are just really awesome, and they're impressive all these years later. And I really could say the same thing about the presentation. For the time, this game just looked incredible. The character models were great, the environments were stunning, and the lighting was just something else. And here we are 20 plus years later, and it's still a pretty good looking game. The lighting is still excellent, the environments are well detailed, and I think the character models are still pretty good. And the game actually runs pretty decent on modern PCs, something I can't say for the later Splinter Cell games. But anyway, the original Splinter Cell, it's an absolute classic. It is a certified banger, and all these years later, I think the game is still excellent and totally worth playing. If you're looking for one of the greatest stealth games of all time, try the original game, especially if you haven't tried it at this point. While it might take a minute to get into the swing of things, since there are a few aspects that have aged, I think the game is still more than playable nowadays, and it still is incredibly enjoyable. It's a legendary stealth game for a reason. But then we have one of the most legendary games of all time, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. It probably does not come as a surprise at all that I think Chaos Theory is the best of the Splinter Cell games. If you ask the average Splinter Cell fan what they think the best game in the series is, I'm like 98% sure they're gonna say Chaos Theory is the best one. And it really isn't hard to see why. I actually had never played this game up until very recently, and I was a bit skeptical of it. I was like, is it really that good? Are you sure it's not just nostalgia? But then I played all the way through it. Oh yeah, this game is actually just mad good. And it's crazy how it's been like 20 years and the game is still a masterpiece. I don't really have any other word to describe it. Like, the game is just one of the best stealth games ever made. Nay, one of the best games ever made. Arguably the best Tom Clancy game ever. It's right here. It's Chaos Theory. But let's actually, review the game. I got a bit to say about it. When it comes to this game's story, it isn't crazy different from the prior two Splinter Cell games. It still sees you play as NSA operative Sam Fisher as he tries to stop some international terrorists and of course save the world. But this game has a significantly darker theme than the prior games, and it takes the story a lot more seriously. It's also easier to follow. Like, yes, it still is rooted in that Tom Clancy reality and everything does seem plausible, but I was actually getting a bit more into this story than the prior games. And one reason I was getting more into it than the other ones is Sam himself is awesome. This is the best incarnation of Sam Fisher. He has a lot of memorable moments, he's just a really likable guy, and he's actually funny. He cracks jokes basically every level, and it's always great. Despite the overall darker tone, Sam actually has a lot of funny moments. He just has a really great personality. Dude is just a straight legend. The enemies even say funny things from time to time. The narrative, story, plot, whatever you want to call it, I think it's actually pretty good in this game. Something else the Chaos Theory I think really does a great job with is the atmosphere, the vibe. I think the original game had a good vibe. Pandora Tomorrow actually has a very good vibe, but Chaos Theory's just hits different. It's just got this mood to it, this aesthetic, this feel. It's kind of hard to describe unless you've played this game, but if you've played it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And none of the other Splinter Cell games have anything that can match this game's, again, just atmosphere. And I just really love it. I also love how this game looks. It looked incredible for the time, and it looks really good nowadays. The lighting is incredibly impressive, the environments look great, character models are all good. Like, this is a good looking game. But let's actually talk about, playing the video game. So what makes Chaos Theory so good? What's the secret sauce? I'll tell you what the secret sauce is. It's the levels. These are without question some of the greatest levels to ever be featured in a stealth game. From its very first level all the way to the end. They're all fantastic. There is not a bad one here. There's not even a mid one here. They're all interesting, engaging, and different from each other. Every single one feels incredibly different from the last, and I like how many different objectives you get. No two missions feel the same. There's also side objectives that show up in these levels. Some of them are optional. There's multiple ways to go about certain objectives. All of these levels are non-linear. It really incentivizes replaying these missions and maybe trying something a little different. And I mean every single level has memorable moments and set pieces. I was just kind of blown away. It felt like every mission was getting better and better. Like the one where you go into the bank, oh, that was just so good. And then when it comes to the stealth itself, it's just incredible. It really comes together here. The old games had good stealth. Sneaking around in the shadows was fun in the old games, but here it's more refined than ever before. There's way less trial and error, and it doesn't feel finicky like at all. And it doesn't feel like every single person in the fucking universe knows where you are when you get spotted, unlike the original and Pandora Tomorrow. You just feel so cool in this game when you're being as sneaky as possible, taking out all of the light sources, moving around in the shadows. You got your cool ass goggles on, and nobody can see or hear you. The stealth is just excellently done here. Normally, I'm not a perfectionist when it comes to stealth games, I will admit, but Chaos Theory, ooh, I really tried. Finishing a level with no casualties, never being spotted, basically being a straight up phantom, it was a great time. It might have added a little trial and error and extended my playtime out a bit, but it was totally worth it. Using weapons is a little better in this game. Sam isn't crazy inaccurate if you're not sitting still. But the game still doesn't want you to go in guns blazing with brute force. You really are supposed to be sneaky and slow, and the game absolutely does require patience. But that's okay, because as you're waiting, you get to listen to a fantastic soundtrack. The soundtrack is so good in Chaos Theory. Some of the older Splinter Cells have pretty good music, but then there's Chaos Theory's soundtrack. It is just unbelievably good. And all I gotta say is that the soundtrack matches the rest of the game. The game has a good length, the pacing and progression are just superb, and again, there's plenty of replayability. You're gonna want to come back to this game again. I certainly have already. On top of this, there's a co-op campaign that's actually good as well. There's some good levels in that one, and the multiplayer was legendary for the time. Spies vs. Mercs is about as beloved as it gets when it comes to multiplayer modes or PvP. All in all, Chaos Theory, it really is the complete package. It is no hyperbole, one of the greatest games ever. If you're someone who likes stealth games even a little bit, this is a must play. It is one of those games that I advise everybody goes out of their way to try before they pass on to the next life. It really is that good. I'm mad at myself that it took me this long to finally get to the game. Like, I had heard for years how good it was, but once I actually played all the way through it, then I got it. Then I realized why everybody likes it as much as they do, and it's why I love stealth games, man. You feel just so invisible in this game, you feel so cool. Sam Fisher's awesome, the story's great, the levels are great. There's really nothing to dislike with this one. This really is peak when it comes to stealth games. And that's it for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed it. It was fun talking about Splinter Cell, Tom Clancy, all that good stuff. If you made it to this part of the video, you can comment our secret code word. It's going to be sneaky because I'm going to be really sneaky and get on out of here. Yeah, that's not a great transition. See y'all later. Stay safe, everyone.